As an endocrinologist specializing in male hormonal optimization and aging, I am constantly confronted with the half-truths propagated by the modern supplement industry. The level of clinical misinformation I encounter daily is deeply frustrating, particularly regarding botanical compounds marketed to senior men. Currently, there is a massive commercial trend pushing isolated maca root as a singular, miraculous cure for declining male vitality and poor erection quality. Men are spending their resources on high doses of this single ingredient, expecting a profound physical transformation, only to be met with bitter disappointment. I am recording this today to issue a very clear medical alert. Taking maca root alone when you are over the age of 50 is biologically equivalent to stepping heavily on a car's gas pedal when the transmission is completely disconnected. The brain is sending the signal, but the physical machinery is incapable of responding. To force a rock-solid physical response, you must combine that neurological signal with a completely different, highly specific botanical mechanism. I know exactly why you clicked on this presentation today. You have likely purchased a bottle of maca, taken it faithfully for weeks, and while you may have noticed a slight, fleeting improvement in your general mood or energy, your actual physical rigidity and duration remain frustratingly absent. I see countless patients in my clinic who sit in front of me utterly demoralized, believing their bodies are fundamentally broken because the industry's most famous supplement failed them. I want you to stay with me until the very end of this clinical breakdown. Today, I am going to explain the exact biological blind spot that the supplement companies are hiding from you, and I will reveal the precise cellular activator you must combine with your protocol to actually translate desire into sustained physical rigidity. To understand why isolated maca is failing you, we must examine the true mechanical nature of the male endocrine system. A sustained, rigid erection is not a single biological event. It is the final result of a complex, two-part communication chain known as the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis. Maca root is a powerful botanical, but its mechanism of action is almost entirely restricted to the central nervous system. It acts on the hypothalamus in your brain, essentially amplifying the neurological signal for arousal and vitality. It turns up the volume of the command. However, and this is the critical clinical distinction, maca does not directly force your testicles to produce more testosterone, nor does it alter the vascular architecture of your pelvic region. It merely shouts the order louder. This creates a massive physiological conflict in men over 50. As you age, the specific cells in your testicles responsible for manufacturing testosterone, known as Leydig cells, become lethargic and insensitive. They lose their density and their ability to interpret the brain's signals. When you take maca alone, you are generating a massive neurological demand for an erection, but that signal is traveling down to Leydig cells that are physically dormant. The brain says go, but the localized tissue simply cannot comply. The most frequent and tragic mistake I see senior men make is quietly doubling or tripling their dose of maca, assuming they just need a stronger stimulus. In reality, they are merely exhausting their central nervous system while their peripheral physical infrastructure remains entirely starved of the actual free testosterone required to initiate the hydraulic pressure for an erection. Prominent research published in major endocrine journals consistently highlights that without addressing the localized sensitivity of the gonadal tissue, central stimulants eventually lose all efficacy and leave the patient in a state of high neurological desire but zero physical capability. To resolve this devastating disconnect, we must systematically address the 3 biological steps required to restore full structural function, starting with the immediate activation of the local cellular machinery. The first and most critical action you must take is to introduce a compound that directly targets and wakes up the dormant Leydig cells. This is where the rare botanical intervention comes into play. You must look toward a specific root extract known as forskolin. While maca works from the top down, forskolin works from the bottom up. Forskolin possesses a highly unique, documented ability to directly activate an enzyme inside your testicular cells called adenylate cyclase. When adenylate cyclase is activated, it triggers a cascade that forces your Leydig cells to drastically increase the endogenous production of testosterone, entirely independent of the brain's signaling. By combining forskolin with Maca, you are creating a profound bidirectional therapeutic protocol. The Maca provides the neurological spark, and the forskolin ensures that the localized testicular machinery is actually awake, primed, and producing the raw hormonal fuel required to translate that spark into massive vascular expansion. Without this localized cellular activation, you are fighting a losing battle against your own biology. The second mandatory step in this protocol addresses a completely different, yet equally destructive metabolic trap. Even if you successfully wake up your Leydig cells and begin producing fresh testosterone, your aging body has a sinister mechanism waiting to steal it. As men age, and particularly as they accumulate even small amounts of visceral fat around the abdomen, their bodies produce high levels of an enzyme called aromatase. Aromatase has one insidious job. It chemically converts your hard-earned, newly produced masculine testosterone into circulating estrogen. This is why so many men feel soft, lethargic, and physically unresponsive despite trying various therapies. Their testosterone is literally being hijacked and transformed into a female hormone. To protect the physical rigidity you are trying to build, you must actively inhibit this aromatase enzyme. This is where the strategic use of fenugreek becomes an absolute clinical necessity. Fenugreek contains highly specific compounds that bind to the aromatase enzyme, effectively neutralizing it. By doing this, it acts as a chemical shield. It ensures that the fresh testosterone your Leydig cells are now producing remains as free, bioavailable testosterone in your bloodstream, rather than being converted into tissue-softening estrogen. When you block this conversion, the male body is suddenly flooded with the exact hormonal profile required to trigger the aggressive release of nitric oxide in the pelvic floor, which is the final requirement for trapping blood in the tissue. Before I detail the precise way to manage this complete biological protocol and explain how to safely bypass the standard pharmaceutical limitations, I want to take a brief moment to ask for your support. If you are finding this level of unfiltered, advanced endocrinology valuable, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. My primary mission is to extract this standard of clinical education out of expensive private medical practices and make it entirely accessible to every man who is silently struggling with these age-related changes. Your interaction with this video helps this vital medical reality reach the men who desperately need to understand it. For the first decade of my clinical practice, I was highly rigid in my approach to male aging. I firmly believed that synthetic testosterone replacement therapy, administered via weekly injections or daily creams, was the only scientifically valid route for men over 50. I viewed the entire botanical and nutritional supplement industry with deep, uncompromising skepticism, considering natural compounds to be nothing more than expensive placebos. I routinely dismissed any patient who asked about natural hormonal support, strictly enforcing my pharmaceutical protocols. However, I was eventually forced to confront a massive and undeniable gap in my own clinical outcomes. I had a significant subgroup of patients, specifically men between the ages of 60 and 72, who simply could not tolerate synthetic hormone replacement. Their bodies reacted poorly, their blood became dangerously thick, their prostate markers spiked, or they simply refused to be tethered to clinical injections for the rest of their lives. Because they could not handle the synthetic route, they were left with absolutely nothing. Their physical vitality entirely flatlined. This clinical failure forced me to aggressively dive into the pharmacological literature surrounding natural enzymatic pathways. I needed a way to stimulate endogenous production without shutting down the body's natural systems. I eventually identified a specific, highly refined botanical matrix that I cautiously began to integrate into my protocols for these difficult cases. It contained the exact clinical doses of forskolin to activate the adenylate cyclase in the dormant Leydig cells, forcefully commanding them to produce testosterone. Crucially, it was combined with specialized fenugreek extracts to immediately inhibit the aromatase enzyme, ensuring that the new testosterone was protected from estrogen conversion. Once I began utilizing this specific nutritional support, the clinical shifts I observed in those older patients were undeniable. I distinctly remember observing those men in the 60 to 72 age bracket, the exact men who had failed synthetic therapy and had resigned themselves to a lifeless physical state, returning to the clinic and reporting the sustained return of spontaneous morning rigidity and physical arousal within just 6 weeks of continuous use. They achieved this profound reversal by simply providing their cellular machinery with the correct biochemical instructions. I always verify that any compound I recommend is subjected to rigorous independent laboratory testing, ensuring absolute purity and the total absence of synthetic adulterants. Because I receive an overwhelming volume of questions regarding this specific formulation, I have placed a direct link in the pinned comment below this video so you can examine the exact scientific composition and purity profile for yourself. When you step back and analyze the aging male body through this comprehensive endocrine lens, you realize that ignoring hormonal degradation has consequences far beyond the bedroom. Failing to support your Leydig cells does not just result in a frustrating loss of physical rigidity. It leads to systemic metabolic decline. When the testicles are starved of the correct signaling and activation over a period of years, the localized tissue actually begins to undergo apoptosis, which is a process of programmed cellular death. The tissue physically shrinks and permanently loses its functional capacity. Furthermore, when your testosterone to estrogen ratio is left unchecked, it alters your entire cognitive and physical reality. One of the most striking observations I make in my clinical practice is seeing senior men who have been diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression, severe chronic fatigue, and cognitive fog by other practitioners. In reality, they are not clinically depressed. They are profoundly, severely hormonally starved. Their brains are operating in a chemical environment dominated by estrogen and devoid of the driving force of free testosterone. Maintaining your localized vascular rigidity is actually the ultimate biomarker for maintaining your systemic youth, your cognitive sharpness, and your structural integrity as you navigate your 60s and 70s. We have thoroughly dismantled the dangerous myth of the single supplement approach today. We examined why isolated Maca only addresses the brain's demand while ignoring the physical machinery. We detailed how forskolin directly activates the dormant Leydig cells to produce fresh hormonal fuel. And we explored why fenugreek is clinically mandatory to stop that fuel from being chemically converted into estrogen. Tell me in the comments, have you ever spent money on a single supplement like Maca, only to feel absolutely no physical difference in your rigidity? The male endocrine system is incredibly responsive, possessing a remarkable capacity to regenerate and optimize, but the receptor density on your Leydig cells does not remain viable indefinitely. If they are left in a state of chemical dormancy and estrogen dominance for years on end, the cellular machinery undergoes permanent fibrotic changes, and the biological window for natural reactivation permanently closes. The targeted nutritional protocol I discussed is designed to provide that precise, localized cellular activation precisely when your natural pathways begin to fail. The link is located in the pinned comment below for you to access, review the clinical formulation, and evaluate it calmly. Waiting for your physical infrastructure to completely collapse before taking action is the single greatest mistake you can make. True clinical longevity is stepping in and commanding the system to work before the tissue forgets how.